you left here right now, you can go out and do a bunch of movement screens. Before we talk about any exercise or going to anything, you have enough ammunition to go out and start correcting movement patterns. Now think about that. You see a person with a shoulder mobility restriction, do what you think would work to improve that pattern. Whether it's foam roll, whether it's using some tubing, whether it's doing some stretching on that person. And if you rescreen them and it's better, then that's the right exercise. And I think that sometimes gets lost when Grant and I do this workshop, because so many people want to say, okay, what do we do for this? What do we do for this? My question is, what would you do for it? And chances are, if it works, that's what you should do. And we're going to go through tomorrow corrections for every one of the movement patterns. But that's not to say that's everything that he would do or I would do. Okay? These are just examples of what we have found that work. But right now, if you left, you go to screen a bunch of people, you will start to figure out what I need to be working on with this individual. Okay? So you screen a bunch of people, go out and screen a bunch of people, and you'll start to see what things become obvious. What's the obvious thing you need to work on? And if everybody's a 2, you're going to gravitate towards what Gray was talking about this morning, the active straight leg raise and shoulder mobility. Because they are the foundation for everything else. Okay? Yes?
So, are you saying these 7 screen buttons will catch all kind of like the guy that can't keep up with it? Well, what is these screens?
Question was, will these 7 screens catch all movement patterns? Yeah, it is possible to have an elbow or wrist problem and the screen not pick it up. It's going to be pretty hard to have an ankle problem and not pick it up. Obviously, we're not evaluating the neck in any way. So what we're looking at is major movement patterns. The things we're trying to get are shoulders, hips, core interaction, and the way the rest of the limbs act on the body. And yeah, it's pretty thorough, not as a medical assessment, but it's pretty thorough. If you've got somebody who says, I wish to exercise and I wish to be active, it's very accurate in saying that if somebody movement screens better, they're going to have less issues training, competing, conditioning than they would if they had those. So it's catching most of the major movement patterns. Sure you
Shoulder
do.
mobility. Lunge.
Shoulder mobility, lunge, and squat. Right. Because we're going to see, you may have a different shoulder position when the legs are in lunge than you do, and you may find out it looks like both shoulders can't go back, but really it's only one. So, and that's what I think we find. We see shoulders that don't move, and we often make an assumption that it's a shoulder problem. And it could easily be a lat problem, or it could be coming from the opposite hip. So a lot of times we rush right to the area where we see the restriction. And don't worry, clinicians make that same mistake. We rush right to the area where the pain is, and sometimes we get tunnel vision and don't catch the dysfunction. This forces you to look at the body and the movement patterns as a whole before you ever mention a muscle or a joint. And without Lee and I really hitting that active straight leg raise, shoulder mobility, fitness professionals, because they're trying to be more functional, think they're doing their clients a favor by going for that hurdle step or lunge or squat instead of monkeying around with this little stuff. And I'm telling you, that's where the money is. That's where the aha moments are.
Right now, if you read what's on the internet and you see other screens out there, everybody focuses on the squat. And honestly, we did early on. And that's one thing that we was like, hey, we got to work on the squat. And after 13 years, really the last 5 years maybe, that's become less, and I don't want to say importance, but that's one of the last things. Because what we have started to see, if we go back to the basics, and this is kind of a good segue into their exercise stuff tomorrow, back to the basics and fundamentals of development and motor learning, get somebody moving on the ground. Get somebody moving on the ground better, and then get them to stand. That's where we learn to move. We learned to move on the ground. Then we stood up. We didn't learn to move standing and go down. So we want to retrain the squat pattern. We're going to talk tomorrow about retraining the squat pattern by doing stuff on the floor. Not doing stuff standing. But we're going to do stuff with the active straight leg raise, shoulder mobility, push-up, rotary speed, those things. correct those things, then see how they influence the functional patterns, which are squat, lunge, and hurdle step. And by correcting those fundamentals, those more primitive, more mobility type activities, we have a better influence or better improvements for the other ones. So it's very much a carryover.
The other thing, and one of the reasons that you would logically go for that squat, and the reason we did initially, is because the squat is very representative. In your groups, when you saw somebody that just naturally pegged a 3 on the squat, they probably had a pretty high score, maybe 15 or better, okay? If you got somebody that got a 1 on the squat, they probably struggle with some other movement patterns. So the squat is very representative of people who are moving well or maybe not moving so well. But just because it's representative doesn't mean it's where you focus. If you think about the motor control it takes to do a deep squat, your shoulders are in an extreme, okay? You're moving your ankle, knee, and hip simultaneously, symmetrically. Your lumbopelvic rhythm has to do about 4 tilts in the process, and you've got to fire your soft core, not your hard core, to get down through it. So it's basically a lot going on. It's very representative. And if you look at somebody who gets a 1 on the squat, they're probably not going to do as well on the rest of the screen. But don't stop there, do the whole thing, because getting that squat back, not by attacking the squat, but by getting every one of those patterns right before you go to it.
I play a PhD on TV. Not really one, but I'll put my research hat on for a second. We did a study, oh gosh, probably in '01. One of the first studies we did.
You're still using Clearasil.
I think I was. I was still bringing my lunch to school and stuff. I think it was '01 we did this study. And what we found is that the best predictor, the test that's the best predictor of the overall score was the active straight leg raise. So the active straight leg raise, the squat was second, but the active straight leg raise was the best way to determine how well somebody was going to test overall. It wasn't the squat, it wasn't the hurdle step, it wasn't the lunge. It was the leg raise. Because that's a good representation of what's going on here.